The Last of Us's Factions MP is the best multiplayer I think I've played in a very, very long time. The strategy that's involved, the whole chess game that it feels like you're playing against the enemy team, of course, the whole team based aspect of it, like, being able to mark your enemies and it actually matters this time around. Like, it all plays together into this neat package to where, the craft items that you have works in conjunction with potentially the play set or the skill set of your teammates. And the same goes vice versa. The layout of the maps, how much everything just all seems to be coherent and cohesive. Well, Naughty Dog has finally given us a statement after all of the many different job listings that we've seen about The Last of Us's Factions MP, which is, of course, still under wraps right now as we get more and more revealed about the story every day. And by the time this video is up, you should have seen a couple of videos on my channel about The Last of Us's story updates and information that we have on the story. As you guys know, that there is a press demo. We did get a quick look or a quick glance at it. Of course, I think Game Radar had permission to actually go ahead and upload, some of the gameplay footage that they got. Nothing too serious, but just a little bit to show us kind of what the game is going to play like. And this game is looking absolutely fucking amazing. But what did Naughty Dog have to say about Factions MP that I'm bringing you guys a video today? Well, they put out this official statement that reads, "We wanted to address multiplayer in The Last of Us Part 2. As we've stated, the single player campaign is far and away the most ambitious project Naughty Dog has ever undertaken. Likewise, as development began on the evolution of our factions mode from The Last of Us Part 1, the vision of the team grew beyond an additional mode that could be included with our enormous single player campaign. Wanting to support both visions, we made the difficult choice that The Last of Us Part 2 would not include an online mode. However, you will eventually experience the fruit of our team's online ambition, but not as part of The Last of Us Part 2. When and where it will be realized is still to be determined, but rest assured, we are as big a fan of factions as the rest of our community and are excited to share more when it's ready. Naughty Dog." So, if I let me say this first. I see in the community already that a lot of people are misconstruing this to believe that Factions MP will not be a part of The Last of Us Part 2, as in the whole package going forward. But what they're saying here is basically that we're getting a GTA Online or Red Dead Redemption 2 Online kind of thing that's going with this. What they're doing is taking The Last of Us Part 2 and separating it into two different things. So apparently it seems like Factions is going to be its own game, which I'm going to be honest, that's a fucking smart move because the story, I guess, just really took away from the hype I guess Factions MP got. Because to say that for me personally and for a lot of people, I've asked a lot of people about Factions MP. Most of my friends who've played Factions MP generally tend to agree that yes, this is one of, if not the best multiplayer experiences that have come about in the past 10 years, in the past decade, bro. So, with that being said, of course, why is it that The Last of Us Factions MP never wound up, of course, really taking off versus the story, which allowed the game to be sold? I think 4 million copies were sold on the PS3 when the game first launched on the PS4, the remastered version. I think it sold 1 million copies. I think day one or within its first week. So it's like for the game to be selling so well, why is it that Factions MP didn't really take off like the story mode did? Whereas the story is seen to be like one of the best stories in gaming, period. Of course, the multiplayer, which is like one of the best multiplayer experiences ever. Now, of course, I haven't played every multiplayer experience to really make that claim, but out of everything that we've seen in the mainstream light, as The Last of Us would be, it's definitely up there on the upper echelon, bro, with the like best multiplayer experiences that we've had so far, especially in this generation and potentially last generation as well. So, with that being said, what they're saying here is that they're working on Factions MP Part 2, basically. I'm going to call it that. Factions MP Part 2 But the ambition that they had for Factions MP Part 2, much like the campaign, went a lot further than just simply upgrading it. It goes a lot further than just simply, changing up a few things and creating a few systems that balance out like they did with Factions MP, and then throwing that into the game as like a multiplayer mode. What they're doing essentially became a lot more than just simply doing that like they did for Factions 1. Factions 2 is actually, that's a better name. Factions 2 is actually going to be something that's probably going to diverge from the actual campaign and have its own standalone element and its own focus, in a sense that, of course, it may play entirely different, but still giving us hopefully that same masterfully crafted experience that Factions 1 gave us. So that's what they're saying, basically, that we're going to get like a GTA Online thing. I'm hoping this does mean that it will be a standalone product when it releases. Now, I will say, if you bought The Last of Us Part 2, then even if the game hasn't been inserted into your console for a while, depending on how long it takes this to come out relative to The Last of Us Part 2, if you bought The Last of Us Part 2, Factions MP should be free. Like, I think Naughty Dog definitely understands that, because it should have been a part of the full game. I do still agree with that consensus. It should have been a part of the full game. However, if they want to take the time to balance it out and really work on it the way that they want it to truly be, versus instead of being like Factions 1, in which it was like a rebalance of most of the elements from the game, and then putting that on some amazing ass maps, and of course, and balancing out like, the guns and stuff, rebalancing those and adding new guns and things like that. Instead of just doing that, if they want to do it like this, then I feel like people who bought The Last of Us Part 2, who've played The Last of Us Part 2, if it's been inserted into your console, then you should get the Factions mode for free. Or even if you've beaten the game or something like that, something to where it kind of, we know this was supposed to be a part of the full game, so here's now the multiplayer now that it's finished. That's kind of what they should do. They also should run a beta for it, because I remember when the remaster first came out back in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, there was a lot of technical issues with the online, and maybe that's what it was that made Factions not take off like the story of The Last of Us. So they should do like a bunch of beta testing and stuff like that. Allow people to get their hands on it. Allow hype to generate before it comes out, because I want to see The Last of Us Part 2 has literally taken over the gaming sphere. Right before we got to hear word about The Last of Us Part 2, everybody was on Final Fantasy VII Remake, and now it's like everybody's completely on The Last of Us Part 2. Every day I get on Twitter, there's always some new information. Every day I get on YouTube, there's always some new information about The Last of Us Part 2. This game has become a cultural phenomenon, and I feel like Factions needs this right now. It needs this to become exactly what it should have been the first time around, which is something that I think we should have been seeing, like events for Factions. That's how good the fucking game was. But we'll see what happens going forward. Hopefully this gives you guys a better understanding of this statement that The Last of Us Factions MP or Factions 2 got from Naughty Dog, stating that they want to take more time to ensure that the vision of their team is actually realized, instead of just trying to throw it on as a component to The Last of Us Part 2. And hopefully this pays off in the end, and we wind up with a huge ass community of players, something kind of like Rainbow Six Siege, in which that game was sort of dying in the beginning. So that very first phase of Rainbow Six Siege is kind of like Factions 1, in which there's a very strong fan base for it that stuck around, which is kind of me and the rest of the players that you still see on Factions MP. I want Factions 2 to be the revamped, revitalized version of Rainbow Six's Siege community, in which we kind of get that same type of thing going. So thank you guys for tuning into this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. This has been your boy Amaziah. Hopefully you stick around for more The Last of Us content, as I will be bringing out even more content, more than you've probably seen already, or more than, of course, you haven't seen. So I'll go ahead and put a few links to other videos in the video. Hopefully you go check those out. And this has been your boy Amaziah. Peace the heck out.